Elvis Presley's death shocked the world, but what if everything we thought we knew was a lie? For decades, the real story behind the King's final moments has been buried until now. Who was the mysterious figure some believe is responsible for Elvis's death, and why has this truth remained hidden for so long? Recently unsealed autopsy documents reveal Elvis's real cause of death, exposing disturbing details that were kept from the public. What they found will leave you speechless. And perhaps the most heartbreaking revelation of all, the terrible secret Elvis was hiding in his final days. A truth so shocking it changes everything we thought we knew about the King of Rock and Roll. Get ready to uncover the shocking secrets of Elvis Presley's death, because this story is far from over. He was a truck driver before he was a rock star, a rebel before he was a legend, a king before he knew how to rule. This is the untold story of Elvis Presley. The rise, the excess, the struggles, and the shocking truths behind the man who changed music forever. Elvis Aaron Presley entered the world on January 8, 1935, but he wasn't alone. He had a twin, Jesse Garon Presley, except Jesse never took a breath. Stillborn, he was buried the next day in an unmarked grave, and from that moment on, Elvis carried the weight of being the chosen one. His mother, Gladys, was fiercely protective, convinced her surviving son had been spared for something great. But the Presley family wasn't blessed with an easy life. They were dirt poor, scraping by in Tupelo, Mississippi during the Great Depression. Their home? A tiny two-room shotgun shack. His father, Vernon, was a dreamer who made bad decisions. One of them landed him in prison for forging a check, leaving Gladys and young Elvis struggling to survive. Through it all, music was Elvis's escape. Church was his first concert hall, the fiery gospel choirs filling his ears with soaring harmonies. But outside the church doors, he was absorbing something else. The sound of the blues pouring out of juke joints and street corners where black musicians played raw, heart-wrenching songs that told stories of pain, love, and survival. Elvis didn't just listen, he soaked it in. He watched how these performers moved, how they let the music take control of their bodies. It was dangerous, it was thrilling, and it would become part of him. Country music was the other ingredient in his musical DNA. The South was alive with the sounds of Hank Williams, Jimmie Rodgers, and Bill Monroe. Their twang, their storytelling, their longing, it all found a home inside the young boy from Tupelo. In 1946, Elvis asked his mother for a bicycle. Instead, she handed him a guitar. It was a cheap, simple instrument, but it was destiny. He didn't just strum it, he felt it. The vibrations, the rhythm, the power of making sound. This wasn't just a toy. It was a weapon, a ticket out of poverty, a key to something bigger. By the time Elvis turned 18, he was just another kid in Memphis trying to find his way. He took a job as a truck driver, but his mind was elsewhere. On music, on rhythm, on the sound that was forming inside him. He didn't look like a country singer, and he didn't fit in with the polished pop stars of the day. He was something new, something raw. In 1953, Elvis walked into Sun Studio, a tiny recording studio run by Sam Phillips. He paid $3.98 to record 2 songs. Just a simple gift for his mother. But fate had other plans. Phillips, always on the hunt for a white singer who could capture the feeling of black music, heard something in Elvis. He wasn't just another kid with a guitar. He had it. That electrifying, unpredictable, rule-breaking it that couldn't be taught. The moment came in July 1954. During a late-night jam session with guitarist Scotty Moore and bassist Bill Black, Elvis picked up his guitar and tore into That's All Right, a blues song by Arthur Crudup. But this wasn't just a cover, it was different. It was fast, wild, untamed. When Memphis DJ Dewey Phillips played the song on the radio, the response was immediate. The phone lines exploded. People wanted to know who this was. More importantly, they wanted to know what he was. Was he black? Was he white? He was something in between, a force that blurred the lines in a deeply segregated America. From that moment, Elvis was on fire. He started performing across the South, and his stage presence was something the world had never seen before. The way he moved, hips swinging, legs shaking, eyes locked onto the crowd, it was animalistic, hypnotic, and to some, completely scandalous. Parents were horrified. Preachers called him the devil's messenger, but teenagers, they worshipped him. By 1955, Elvis had caught the attention of Colonel Tom Parker, a shrewd, cunning manager who saw dollar signs in Presley's future. Under Parker's guidance, Elvis signed with RCA Victor, and in 1956, his first RCA single, Heartbreak Hotel, exploded across the country. It wasn't just a hit, it was a revolution. His self-titled debut album followed, featuring tracks like Blue Suede Shoes and Hound Dog. He was no longer just a regional phenomenon, he was national, then global. The world had found its new king, but with fame came controversy. Religious leaders condemned him, TV stations debated banning him, and when he performed on The Ed Sullivan Show, the camera famously filmed him from the waist up, because his movements were deemed too sexual for American audiences. Elvis didn't care. He knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't just selling music. He was selling rebellion, and the world was buying. At school, he was quiet, a misfit, an outsider with greasy hair and thrift store clothes. But when he played music, everything changed. He had something no one else did, something dangerous, something different, and soon the world would hear it. By 1957, Elvis Presley wasn't just a musician, he was a phenomenon. His concerts were riots, his records sold in the millions. His name alone could make teenagers scream, faint, and fight their way to the front row just to catch a glimpse of him. But with great fame comes great scrutiny. As his popularity grew, so did the backlash. Critics slammed him as a dangerous influence on America's youth. Conservative groups labeled him vulgar. One Florida judge even warned him that if he continued his obscene performances, he'd be arrested for indecency. Elvis laughed it off, but the pressure was real. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Colonel Tom Parker was turning his star into something even bigger. Music wasn't enough. Elvis had to be a movie star. Parker secured him a deal with Paramount Pictures, and in 1956 he made his big screen debut in Love Me Tender. The film was a smash hit, and suddenly Elvis wasn't just an artist, he was a Hollywood leading man. Over the next few years, he released a string of hit singles: Don't Be Cruel, Jailhouse Rock, All Shook Up, while also starring in a series of films that cemented his heartthrob status. But just as he was reaching his peak, everything changed. In 1958, Elvis received a letter that no celebrity wanted to get. The U.S. Army was drafting him. He could have fought it. He could have used his fame to dodge service. Instead, he embraced it. In March 1958, the world watched as Elvis Presley, global superstar rock and roll icon, stood in line like every other young man, dressed in military fatigues, ready to serve his country. It was a strategic move. By going into the Army, Elvis wasn't just proving himself to America, he was silencing his critics, the ones who said he was just a reckless punk, the ones who said he was a bad influence, the ones who said he wasn't a real man. For 2 years, Elvis lived the life of a soldier in West Germany. No concerts, no screaming fans, just duty, discipline, and structure. But his time in the Army wasn't just about service. It was in Germany that Elvis met 14-year-old Priscilla Beaulieu, the daughter of an Air Force officer. She would later become his wife, but their love story would be anything but traditional. While Elvis was away, tragedy struck. In August 1958, his mother Gladys, the woman who had been his rock, his protector, his best friend, died of hepatitis at just 46 years old. Elvis was shattered. He sobbed uncontrollably at her funeral, clutching her casket, refusing to let go. Something inside him broke that day. The boy who had been so closely tied to his mother was gone, and in his place, a new Elvis Presley was emerging. By the time he was discharged in 1960, the world had changed. Rock and roll had evolved. New artists were taking over, and Elvis the King was about to find out that holding on to his crown would be harder than he ever imagined. When Elvis returned from the Army in 1960, he was still the king, but the world of music had started to shift. Rock and roll was evolving and new stars were rising. But under the guidance of Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis wasn't sent back into the recording studio to reclaim his throne. Instead, he was sent to Hollywood. Colonel Parker had one goal: turn Elvis Presley into the biggest movie star in America. At first, it seemed like a winning strategy. His early films, G.I. Blues, Blue Hawaii, and Viva Las Vegas, were smash hits. The movies were lighthearted, colorful, and packed with catchy songs that sold millions of records. But as the years went on, the formula became painfully predictable. Every Elvis movie started to look the same. He played a charming, rebellious young man who always got the girl, and the plot was little more than an excuse to string together a dozen feel-good songs. The critics tore them apart. They called them mindless, repetitive, and a waste of Elvis's talent. Elvis knew it. He wanted to make serious films, to challenge himself as an actor, but Parker refused to let him take risks. The manager controlled everything, choosing the scripts, the directors, and even the music. By the mid-60s, Elvis's frustration was growing. His albums were no longer selling like they once had. Worse, the British invasion had begun. Bands like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and The Who were taking over the charts, redefining rock music in a way that made Elvis look outdated. For the first time in his career, the king was fading into irrelevance. His Hollywood dream had turned into a prison, a golden cage filled with money but no artistic fulfillment. And deep down, Elvis knew if he didn't do something to reinvent himself, his reign would be over. By 1968, Elvis Presley was a has-been. He hadn't performed live in 7 years. His career was drowning in forgettable movies, and a new generation of artists had stolen the spotlight. Then NBC offered him a one-time television special. This was his chance, maybe his last, to prove to the world that he was still the king, and he didn't waste it. On December 3, 1968, the world watched as Elvis walked onto a small stage in a tight black leather suit. Gone were the movie sets, the cheesy love songs, and the predictable Hollywood gimmicks. This was Elvis, raw and real. He grabbed a guitar, sat down with his old bandmates, and let loose. The audience watched in shock. This wasn't an actor playing a musician. This was a legend reborn. He sang Hound Dog, Heartbreak Hotel, Love Me Tender, and Jailhouse Rock like he was fighting for his throne, and he won. The '68 comeback special was a cultural moment, a career resurrection that reminded the world why Elvis Presley was the king. With his confidence restored, Elvis returned to the stage for real. But instead of touring the world, Colonel Parker had a different plan: Las Vegas. In 1969, Elvis signed a massive residency deal with the International Hotel, performing in front of packed crowds night after night. His performances were larger than life. Flashy jumpsuits, a full orchestra, dramatic lighting, and that unmistakable voice. Audiences went wild. Sin City belonged to the king. For a while, everything seemed perfect. Elvis was performing again, the money was flowing, and he was back on top. But behind the dazzling lights of Vegas, something was wrong. The schedule was brutal. 2 shows a night, 7 days a week, and Elvis, always the perfectionist, pushed himself to the limit. To keep up, he started relying on prescription drugs, uppers to stay awake, downers to sleep. The same energy that had fueled his comeback was slowly destroying him. By the early 1970s, Elvis Presley was living 2 lives. On stage, he was still the king, a larger-than-life superstar, performing to sold-out crowds in Las Vegas. But behind closed doors, he was falling apart. His marriage to Priscilla was crumbling. Years of touring, his increasing dependence on drugs, and his growing paranoia had driven a wedge between them. Priscilla, feeling neglected and trapped in the shadow of his fame, left him in 1972. It shattered him. He had always been possessive over her, and losing her sent him into a downward spiral. His health began to deteriorate rapidly. The once lean, electrifying Elvis was replaced by a bloated, sluggish version of himself. He suffered from insomnia, high blood pressure, liver damage, and an enlarged colon, all made worse by the pills he was popping like candy. His weight fluctuated wildly. Some nights he could barely move on stage. Other nights, he was so medicated that he slurred his words and forgot lyrics. His friends and bandmates begged him to slow down, but Colonel Parker kept pushing him. More shows, more money, more pressure. Elvis's inner circle, the Memphis Mafia, enabled his addictions. They weren't just his friends, they were his protectors, his enablers, and, in many ways, his jailers. They made sure he had whatever he wanted: pills, food, women, anything to numb the pain. Despite his failing health, Elvis kept performing. In 1973, he made history with Aloha from Hawaii, the first concert broadcast live via satellite. It was watched by over 1.5 billion people worldwide. But even that success couldn't save him. His body was giving out. By 1976, Elvis had become a ghost of his former self. His speech was slurred. His once famous movements were sluggish. His face, bloated and tired, no longer belonged to the rebellious young man who had once shocked the world. Yet, despite everything, he refused to stop. On June 26, 1977, he performed his last concert in Indianapolis. He could barely get through the songs. He looked exhausted, lost. It was clear Elvis Presley was running on borrowed time, and just weeks later, his body finally gave up. Elvis Presley's final months were a slow-motion train wreck that no one around him dared to stop. He was only 42 years old, but he looked twice his age, bloated, pale, his once dazzling blue eyes now dull and lifeless. His body was failing, but his will to perform refused to die. Even when he could barely stand, he would stumble onto stage in his rhinestone jumpsuits, his gut pressing against the fabric, sweat pouring down his face, struggling to breathe. His speech was slurred, his movements sluggish. Some nights, he forgot his own lyrics. His addiction to prescription drugs had spiraled completely out of control. In 1977 alone, his personal doctor, George Nicopolis, Dr. Nick, prescribed him over 10,000 pills, a cocktail of painkillers, sedatives, and amphetamines. Elvis didn't just take them, he devoured them by the handful. His eating habits had become legendary. He would binge on insane amounts of food. A single meal could include 6 cheeseburgers, a pound of bacon, deep-fried peanut butter and banana sandwiches, and gallons of soda. His weight ballooned past 350 pounds. Yet through all of this, Colonel Tom Parker refused to let him rest. Elvis had debts to pay, and Parker, who was later revealed to be an illegal immigrant with ties to gambling debts, needed his cash cow to keep performing. Then came August 16, 1977. It was supposed to be a normal day. That night, Elvis was scheduled to fly to Portland, Maine for another concert. Instead, he never left Graceland alive. At around 2 p.m., Elvis's fiancée, Ginger Alden, found him collapsed on the floor of his bathroom. He wasn't breathing. His skin was a horrifying shade of blue. His body was stiff. The king of rock and roll was dead. The scene was gruesome. Elvis had died on the toilet. He was face down, pants around his ankles, in what can only be described as a humiliating and undignified end. The initial report claimed that he had suffered a heart attack, but behind closed doors, something far more disturbing was unfolding. The autopsy, what they didn't want you to know. An autopsy was rushed, performed within hours of his death. The official cause, cardiac arrhythmia. But that was a lie. For decades, the full details of Elvis's autopsy report were sealed, hidden away by his family and authorities. Why? Because the truth was even darker than the world imagined. Then in 2013, shocking new information surfaced. Elvis had been dying for years. His body was so riddled with disease and dysfunction that it was a miracle he had lived as long as he did. One of the most shocking discoveries was his colon. A normal human colon is about 5 feet long and around 2 inches wide. Elvis's colon was twice that size, 9 feet long and 5 inches wide. He had severe chronic constipation. His intestines were so impacted with fecal matter that his body had stopped absorbing nutrients properly. His stomach was filled with months-old waste. Some experts believe that he didn't die from a heart attack at all. Instead, his body may have literally shut down due to a toxic buildup of waste. He might have been suffering from megacolon, a deadly condition where the intestines expand to the point of rupture. But that wasn't all. Elvis's prescription drug use had completely wrecked his internal organs. His liver was damaged, his heart was enlarged, his arteries were clogged. He had advanced diabetes. His body was in a state of total collapse. According to coroner Joseph Davis, who re-examined Elvis's autopsy in the 90s, there was no evidence of a drug overdose. Instead, he suggested that Elvis likely suffered a violent sudden heart attack while straining on the toilet. But what about the drugs? In 1977, Dr. Nick was investigated for recklessly prescribing thousands of pills to Elvis. Some claimed he had turned the king into a walking pharmacy. Yet, the most disturbing theory came from Dr. Forrest Tennant, a specialist who reviewed Elvis's medical history. He believed that Elvis suffered from an undiagnosed autoimmune disorder, possibly Shy-Drager syndrome, a rare disease that causes nerve damage, chronic pain, and digestive failure. Did Elvis know he was dying? Some believe he did. In the months before his death, Elvis spoke about death constantly. He told friends that he felt like he didn't have much time left. He started giving away jewelry, cars, and personal items as if he was preparing for the end. In his final days, he was paranoid, delusional, and deeply depressed. One of the last things he ever said was to his cousin Billy Smith just hours before he died. "Billy, I'm going to the bathroom to read." He never came back. Elvis Presley's death was ugly, shocking, and deeply tragic. He was a prisoner in his own body, weighed down by fame, addiction, and the pressure to be the king even when he was falling apart. The official autopsy remains sealed until 2027. What else is being hidden? Will the world finally know the full truth? One thing is certain: Elvis didn't just die. He was slowly destroyed. By the industry, by those around him, and by his own demons. But while his death was tragic, his legacy remains untouchable. He was more than just a rock star. He was a revolution, a cultural earthquake. And no matter how shocking his final days were, Elvis Presley will never truly die. Elvis Presley's life was a roller coaster of triumph and tragedy, a story of greatness, excess, and an ending that still shocks the world to this day. But despite everything, the controversies, the struggles, and the heartbreaking downfall, his music, his impact, and his legend will never fade. From the moment he stepped into Sun's studio to the final days at Graceland, Elvis changed music forever. His influence lives on in every rock star who dares to break the rules, every performer who electrifies a stage, and every fan who still plays his records today. But now, we want to hear from you. What's your favorite Elvis song? Do you believe there's more to the mystery of his death? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the life and legend of Elvis Presley, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a video. More shocking stories, hidden truths, and music history legends are coming your way. So stay tuned. Elvis may have left the building, but his story will never end.
He walked up within probably 8 inches of my face, 10 inches, and he said, "You got to go back to Memphis. You got to meet with Vernon. Elvis is dead."
Could the man who built the king of rock and roll have also been the one who led to his downfall? This question lingers over the legacy of Colonel Tom Parker, the enigmatic and controversial manager of Elvis Presley. His influence shaped every aspect of Elvis's career, but was his guidance a path to success or a road to ruin? Before we dive into this fascinating story, make sure to subscribe for more in-depth celebrity insights and music history revelations. Elvis Presley was more than just a musician. He was a cultural phenomenon, an icon whose presence dominated music, film, and the entertainment industry for decades. But behind every great star, there is often a figure pulling the strings, making the decisions, and shaping the career that the public sees. For Elvis, that man was Colonel Tom Parker. Parker was a master strategist, a man whose business acumen helped transform Elvis from a young singer from Mississippi into a global superstar. But his methods were often ruthless and his motivations have been widely debated. Did Parker truly have Elvis's best interests at heart, or was he simply a manipulative businessman who saw the king as a never-ending source of profit? Before he became the infamous Colonel Tom Parker, the man behind Elvis Presley was known as Andreas Cornelis van Kuik. Born in the Netherlands in 1909, his journey to America was as audacious as it was shrouded in mystery. Unlike most immigrants, Van Kuik did not enter the U.S. through legal channels. Instead, he seemingly vanished from his homeland and reappeared in America, where he assumed a new identity, Tom Parker. Rumors swirled about his past, including speculation that he fled the Netherlands due to a criminal offense, possibly even a murder. Whatever the truth, Parker never returned to his homeland and remained obsessively secretive about his origins. He worked in carnival promotions, learning the art of show business from the ground up. His keen understanding of audience psychology and his ability to create hype made him a force to be reckoned with in the entertainment industry. In 1948, Parker was granted the honorary title of Colonel by Louisiana Governor Jimmy Davis, a symbolic title with no military significance. However, Parker used it to craft an identity of Southern aristocracy and authority, giving himself an air of prestige in the business world. Parker's introduction to Elvis Presley was nothing short of serendipitous. By the early 1950s, Parker was managing country music stars like Eddie Arnold and Hank Snow. It was through an associate, Oscar Davis, that Parker first heard of a young rock and roll singer from Memphis who was electrifying audiences with his unique sound and gyrating dance moves. Intrigued, Parker attended one of Elvis's performances and immediately recognized his star potential. By August 1955, Parker had maneuvered his way into Elvis's management team, initially sharing responsibilities with Bob Neal. However, Parker quickly asserted dominance, eventually pushing Neal out and securing full control over Elvis's career. From that moment on, Parker dictated nearly every move Elvis made, setting the stage for an unprecedented rise to superstardom, but also planting the seeds for future controversy and conflict. From the moment Parker took full control of Elvis's career, his management style was marked by an iron grip that extended far beyond typical industry standards. He didn't just oversee Elvis's music, he controlled his film career, branding, public image, and even aspects of his personal life. One of Parker's most pivotal moves was negotiating Elvis's transition from Sun Records, a small but influential label, to RCA Records in 1955. This deal catapulted Elvis onto the national stage, leading to the release of hits like Heartbreak Hotel, Hound Dog, and Jailhouse Rock. However, Parker's true influence became apparent in the way he structured Elvis's career to maximize commercial success at all costs. A career built on profit, not art. While Elvis had undeniable musical talent, Parker viewed him as a product rather than an artist. This became especially evident in his film career. Instead of seeking roles that could have expanded Elvis's artistic credibility, Parker pushed him into formulaic, lightweight musical films that prioritized profit over prestige. Notably, Elvis was considered for roles in Midnight Cowboy and A Star Is Born, films that could have redefined his career. However, Parker turned down these opportunities, instead favoring movies that were easier to produce and guaranteed quick financial returns. This approach led to a string of films that, while commercially successful, did little to elevate Elvis as a serious actor. Over time, these choices contributed to his artistic frustration and eventual disillusionment with Hollywood. Financial exploitation. Perhaps the most controversial aspect of Parker's management was his financial arrangements. While standard music managers typically took around 10 to 20% of an artist's earnings, Parker struck a deal that gave him a staggering 50% cut of Elvis's income. This arrangement was unheard of in the industry and heavily favored Parker, leaving Elvis with a significantly smaller share of his own earnings. Even worse, Parker often structured deals that benefited him more than they did Elvis. In some cases, he negotiated lucrative merchandising and licensing deals that put money directly into his own pocket rather than Elvis's. As Elvis's career progressed, Parker's financial exploitation only intensified. His refusal to allow Elvis to tour internationally, a move that could have expanded his fame and fortune even further, was reportedly due to Parker's own undocumented status in the U.S. Fearing he wouldn't be allowed back into the country, Parker kept Elvis confined to domestic performances, limiting his global impact. Personal interference. Parker's control wasn't limited to business matters, he also inserted himself into Elvis's personal life. One of the most notable examples was his influence over Elvis's relationship with Priscilla Beaulieu. Initially, Parker was against the relationship, fearing it could lead to a scandal that would damage Elvis's wholesome image. However, as the relationship progressed, Parker saw marriage as a way to stabilize Elvis and keep him under control. Biographers suggest that Parker actively encouraged the wedding, believing it would prevent Elvis from indulging in reckless behavior that could jeopardize his career and, by extension, Parker's financial interests. Despite his efforts to control every aspect of Elvis's career and personal life, cracks began to show. Elvis, once eager and ambitious, began to feel trapped by the very system that had made him famous. This growing frustration would soon lead to a downward spiral that Parker either failed to prevent or, as some argue, actively contributed to. Elvis Presley's decline was not sudden. It was a slow, painful descent marked by poor health, substance abuse, and mounting personal struggles. While many factors contributed to his downfall, critics argue that Colonel Tom Parker played a significant role in exacerbating the situation. The military years, a pivotal shift. Elvis's 2-year military service, 1958 to 1960, was a turning point in his life. While stationed in Germany, he was introduced to amphetamines, a habit that would evolve into a full-fledged drug dependency in the years to come. Parker, meanwhile, ensured that Elvis's career remained active by releasing pre-recorded material to keep him in the public eye. Though his return to the U.S. reignited his career, something had changed. The vibrant, rebellious Elvis of the 1950s was slowly morphing into a more controlled, subdued version of himself, one that fit Parker's vision of a marketable star. A grueling schedule and drug dependency. As the years passed, Parker kept Elvis on an exhausting schedule, with relentless touring, film projects, and recording sessions. Instead of prioritizing his well-being, Parker continuously booked high-paying but grueling performances, particularly in Las Vegas. To cope with the demands, Elvis increasingly relied on prescription drugs, including sedatives and stimulants. Parker, fully aware of this escalating drug use, did little to intervene. Some argue that he even encouraged the behavior as it kept Elvis functional and compliant. By the mid-1970s, Elvis's health was visibly deteriorating. His weight fluctuated, his performances became erratic, and he often appeared disoriented. Despite this, Parker continued to push him, ensuring that he fulfilled his contracts regardless of his condition. Elvis's tragic end. On August 16, 1977, Elvis Presley was found unresponsive in his Graceland home. His death at the age of 42 shocked the world. While officially attributed to heart failure, years of drug abuse had undoubtedly taken their toll. Parker's reaction to Elvis's death was chillingly detached. His first words upon hearing the news were reportedly, "This won't change anything." To many, this confirmed what they had long suspected, that Parker saw Elvis not as a human being, but as a product to be profited from. In the aftermath of his death, Parker wasted no time capitalizing on Elvis's legacy, negotiating deals that ensured he would continue to profit from Elvis's name for years to come. However, his grip on Elvis's empire would soon be challenged as the truth about his financial mismanagement began to surface. Elvis Presley's death in 1977 did not mark the end of the Colonel Tom Parker saga. In fact, it exposed years of financial exploitation, mismanagement, and questionable business deals. For years, Parker had built an empire around Elvis, ensuring he reaped enormous profits while keeping Elvis financially dependent. But with the king of rock and roll gone, the scrutiny on Parker intensified. Immediate aftermath. Parker's cold response. In the hours after Elvis's death, while the world mourned, Parker's first concern was business. He reportedly told Elvis's father, Vernon Presley, "You can either make money from this or let others make money off of you." Instead of focusing on preserving Elvis's legacy with dignity, Parker immediately began negotiating deals to monetize his death. At the time of his passing, Elvis's estate was in surprisingly poor financial shape. Despite earning millions throughout his career, his bank accounts contained only about $5 million, a shockingly low amount for a global superstar. Much of this was due to Parker's aggressive profit sharing, as well as Elvis's lavish spending habits. Legal battles and unraveling the truth. Elvis's father, Vernon Presley, had been named the executor of his estate. However, Vernon was elderly and in declining health. He relied heavily on Parker for guidance, until outside parties stepped in to investigate the Colonel's business dealings. A major lawsuit was launched against Parker in the early 1980s, led by the Elvis Presley estate. The legal team, headed by Elvis's ex-wife, Priscilla Presley, and financial advisors, conducted a thorough review of Parker's contracts. What they found was astonishing. Parker had taken 50% of Elvis's earnings, far above the industry standard of 10 to 20%. In some deals, Parker had arranged for himself to take as much as 85% of profits, particularly from merchandising and licensing agreements. The contract between Elvis and Parker was so one-sided that some experts labeled it unconscionable, a legal term for agreements so unfair they could be voided. Priscilla Presley took decisive action, renegotiating the financial structure of Elvis's estate. She and the legal team successfully cut Parker out, ensuring the Presley family regained control over Elvis's earnings. Parker's downfall. Following these revelations, Parker's reputation crumbled. In 1982, a judge ruled that Parker's management had been exploitative and that he had no legal claim to any further earnings from Elvis Presley's estate. He was effectively removed from all financial dealings related to Elvis, marking the end of his power. Parker, who had once controlled the biggest star in the world, now found himself in severe financial trouble.
His gambling addiction had drained much of his wealth, and without access to Elvis's fortune, he was forced to sell assets and rely on dwindling royalties.
After losing control of Elvis's estate, Colonel Tom Parker faded into obscurity. The man who had once orchestrated one of the most successful careers in music history now lived a life of increasing isolation and irrelevance. Declining health and financial struggles. Without Elvis's revenue stream, Parker struggled financially. Decades of extravagant spending and high-stakes gambling had left him with little savings. In an attempt to maintain his lifestyle, he continued to work as a consultant, but he never found another act that came close to Elvis. As the years passed, Parker's health deteriorated. He suffered a stroke in 1994, which left him physically weakened. He spent his final years in Las Vegas, often seen at casinos, still gambling despite his declining financial situation.
Did Parker feel remorse? One of the biggest questions surrounding Parker's later years is whether he felt any guilt for how he treated Elvis. Some who interacted with him in his later years reported that Parker never expressed regret for his actions. He insisted that he had done what was best for Elvis, maintaining that without him, Elvis would never have become a global icon. However, others suggest that Parker privately acknowledged his mistakes. Close associates claimed that he occasionally reflected on how Elvis's career and life could have been different had he made better choices. Still, Parker never publicly apologized or admitted wrongdoing. His legacy remained one of controversy, with many viewing him as both a mastermind and a villain.
The Colonel's death.
On January 21, 1997, Colonel Tom Parker passed away at the age of 87 due to complications from a stroke. His death did not receive the fanfare or tributes that Elvis's had. In fact, his passing was met with mixed reactions. Some mourned the loss of a man who had shaped rock and roll history, while others saw it as the end of a manipulative figure who had exploited Elvis for personal gain.
Unlike Elvis, whose grave at Graceland became a place of pilgrimage for millions, Parker's funeral was a quiet affair. He left behind a tarnished legacy, forever linked to the rise and fall of the world's greatest rock and roll star.
Decades after his death, Colonel Tom Parker remains one of the most polarizing figures in music history. Was he a visionary manager who turned Elvis Presley into a global superstar? Or was he a greedy manipulator who prioritized money over Elvis's well-being? The truth lies somewhere in between.
The case for Parker as a genius.
There is no denying that Parker had an unparalleled understanding of the entertainment business. His strategies for marketing, branding, and controlling the media were groundbreaking for their time. Some of his major achievements include
national and international superstardom. Parker turned Elvis into the first true global rock star, ensuring his music and image reached every corner of the world.
The merchandising empire. Before Parker, music merchandising was a small industry. He transformed it into a multi-million-dollar business, selling everything from Elvis dolls to lunchboxes.
The mystique factor. Parker carefully crafted Elvis's public image, maintaining a balance between accessibility and mystery, which helped sustain his fame for decades. Without Parker, Elvis might never have become the Elvis Presley. His instincts for show business were unmatched, and many of his strategies are still used in the entertainment industry today.
The case for Parker as a villain.
While Parker's business acumen was undeniable, his treatment of Elvis was deeply flawed. His greed and controlling nature had devastating consequences.
Financial exploitation. Taking 50%, and in some cases more, of Elvis's earnings was an extreme and unethical business practice.
Lack of artistic development. Parker prioritized quick cash over long-term artistic success, forcing Elvis into low-quality movies and rejecting roles that could have elevated his career. Restricting international tours. Parker's fear of traveling outside the U.S. due to his undocumented status denied Elvis the opportunity to truly conquer the global stage. Ignoring Elvis's declining health. Instead of intervening when Elvis's drug abuse became severe, Parker kept pushing him to perform, worsening his physical and mental state.
In the end, Parker's legacy is as complex as his personality. He was both a brilliant strategist and a ruthless businessman, a man who made Elvis a legend while also contributing to his downfall. Final verdict.
Would Elvis have been as successful without Parker? Maybe not, but would he have lived a longer, healthier, and happier life with a different manager? Almost certainly.
Parker's name will always be linked to Elvis Presley, but not in the way he might have hoped. While Elvis remains a beloved cultural icon, Parker is remembered as the man who controlled, manipulated, and profited off him until the very end. The story of Colonel Tom Parker and Elvis Presley is one of ambition, power, and ultimately, tragedy. It is a cautionary tale of how the very forces that create legends can also destroy them. Parker's influence on Elvis was undeniable. He was the mastermind behind his meteoric rise, ensuring that Elvis became a household name, a cultural phenomenon, and the undisputed king of rock and roll. Without Parker's business acumen, Elvis might have remained a regional talent, never breaking beyond the borders of Tennessee, but at what cost? Parker's greed, secrecy, and ruthless control drained Elvis financially, emotionally, and physically. He pushed him onto stages when he should have been in rehab. He locked him into bad contracts while pocketing fortunes, and he kept him trapped in a cycle of exhaustion, addiction, and isolation, all to protect his own empire. Even after Elvis's death, Parker's grip on his legacy remained tight until the truth was exposed. By the time the courts stripped him of his influence, it was too late. The damage had been done. So, was Colonel Tom Parker a genius or a villain? The answer depends on how you define success.
If success is fame, fortune, and global domination, then Parker was one of the greatest managers in history. If success is artistic freedom, well-being, and a life well-lived, then he was Elvis's greatest mistake. The Colonel's story serves as a reminder that in the world of show business, not all managers have their stars' best interests at heart. Talent may be the foundation of success, but the wrong people in power can turn even the brightest star into a tragic figure.
Elvis Presley's music, charisma, and legacy live on, adored by generations. Colonel Tom Parker, he remains in the shadows, a man whose name is forever tied to the king, but never with the same love or admiration. The curtain has long fallen on both of their lives, but the debate over Parker's role in history will never truly end. What do you think? Was Colonel Parker a necessary evil or the reason we lost Elvis too soon?
Good evening. Elvis Presley died today. He was 42. Apparently it was a heart attack. He was found at his home in Memphis, not breathing. His road manager tried to revive him. He failed. A hospital tried to revive him. It had failed.
Elvis Presley's death, the end of a once celebrated and iconic life, was tragically undignified. Known as the king of rock and roll, his public persona was full of charisma and confidence, but the state of his body when he died revealed the contrast between his glitzy image and his private struggles. At the time of his death, Elvis's health had severely deteriorated. His heart had grown weak, his intestines in distress from years of neglect, and his body was found in a state that mirrored the overuse of prescription pills. The man who once captivated the world with his energy and charm was now a shadow of himself, trapped in his own physical decline. It's a stark reminder of the realities of fame and the hidden battles that even the most adored celebrities can face.
Elvis Presley was a cultural phenomenon. From the moment he burst onto the music scene, he became the king of rock and roll, a revolutionary figure who reshaped music, fashion, and youth culture. His talent was undeniable, his charisma electric, and his rise to fame was meteoric. But as the years went on, Elvis's vibrant public persona began to shift. No longer the energetic performer, he retreated into the solitude of Graceland. The man who once performed on stage with a raw passion now found himself confined to his home, a reclusive figure who struggled with loneliness and a sense of isolation. The king of rock and roll, adored by millions, was now a prisoner of his own fame, wrestling with the pressures of success and the toll it took on his body and mind.
As Elvis Presley's career continued to soar, so too did the weight of his personal struggles. Fame came with its own unique burdens, and for Elvis, the intense pressure to remain at the top eventually started to erode his well-being. What once seemed like invincibility, his energy, his drive, his powerful stage presence, began to fade, replaced by a series of deeply troubling issues that were physical, emotional, and mental. In the early years of his career, Elvis was known for his athleticism. His performances were electric, full of energy and life. His voice was as powerful as his movements, and his physicality on stage was a major part of his allure. But as the years passed, his body began to change. His once svelte figure became heavier. The weight gain didn't happen all at once, but rather it was a gradual process. almost like a slow, creeping transformation. Elvis, who had once been a symbol of vitality and sex appeal, began to lose his former shape. By the mid-1970s, his weight had spiraled out of control, a reflection of deeper, unaddressed issues. The weight gain was not just a cosmetic problem, it was indicative of larger, more troubling health concerns. Elvis's unhealthy eating habits became a significant part of his life. Overeating was not simply an occasional indulgence, it was an obsession. He had a love for greasy foods, high-calorie meals, and sugary snacks that only seemed to worsen as he became more withdrawn from the public eye. Graceland, the mansion that had once been a haven of luxury and grandeur, now felt like a prison. His food consumption became an escape, a way to cope with the overwhelming pressures he faced, the isolation, and perhaps even a growing sense of purposelessness. But it wasn't just food that took a toll on Elvis's body. In the early years, he had always been careful with his health, but over time he became increasingly reliant on prescription medications. Doctors, in an attempt to treat various ailments, began prescribing Elvis a wide array of drugs. His need for medication started as a way to manage his physical pain, but soon it morphed into a dependency that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Painkillers, sleeping pills, amphetamines, and sedatives all became part of his daily routine. A cocktail of substances designed to mask the physical and mental anguish he was experiencing.
Elvis's struggle with weight and medication was intricately linked to his mental health. What started as a physical transformation became a mirror for his inner turmoil. His once vibrant energy was slowly replaced by fatigue and lethargy. He seemed to have lost the spark that once drove him, and with it, his ability to perform at the same level he once did. The physical changes were one thing, but the mental decline was even more devastating. Elvis's mind was deteriorating as much as his body. Depression was a constant companion, and anxiety gripped him in moments of solitude. The man who had once commanded a stage with a magnetic presence now struggled to leave the confines of Graceland. His reclusiveness became more pronounced as the years went on, and the loneliness he felt only seemed to deepen with every passing day.
He was no longer the king of rock and roll in the same way he had been in the 1950s. Instead of performing in front of adoring crowds, Elvis found himself surrounded by people who were more concerned with enabling his habits than actually helping him. His friends, family, and even his doctors, many of whom knew of his addiction, failed to intervene in a meaningful way. This created an environment where Elvis was left to spiral further into isolation, eating and medicating himself in an attempt to escape the mental and physical pain he endured. What's tragic is that this downward spiral wasn't just a result of a rock star lifestyle gone awry. There was a real struggle beneath the surface, one that was intensified by the constant pressure of fame and the growing sense that no one could truly understand what he was going through. Elvis wasn't just battling addiction and poor health, he was facing the psychological weight of being a legend, of having millions of eyes on him while he felt like a ghost in his own life.
His mental health issues were compounded by his growing sense of paranoia. Elvis started to feel as though people were out to get him, and he became increasingly distrustful of those around him. He was particularly wary of his doctors, many of whom he felt were taking advantage of him. His relationship with his own body became fractured. He was unable to control his weight, his health, or the endless need for drugs, and this only fed his growing sense of desperation. What had once been an intense desire to create and perform had transformed into a desire to numb himself from the pain, to escape the reality he could no longer face. As Elvis continued to decline physically, his mental state also began to show signs of deterioration. He experienced mood swings, periods of extreme exhaustion, and intense irritability. The man who once held the world's attention with his music now found himself unable to perform at the level he once did. His last concerts, though still popular, were a far cry from the energetic shows he had put on in the past. Elvis would often appear lethargic on stage, struggling to keep up with the demands of his performances. His voice, which had once been a force of nature, was now strained and hollow, a reflection of the exhaustion that seemed to have overtaken him. Elvis's isolation grew even more pronounced during this period. He retreated to Graceland, his personal sanctuary, a place where he could hide from the world. Yet even there, he was not free from the weight of his issues. His home had become a symbol of his inner conflict, a place that had once represented success and happiness, but which now stood as a prison of his own making. The toll of years of physical neglect, combined with his emotional and psychological decline, left Elvis a shell of his former self. It became clear to those close to him that his struggles were not just about food, weight, or medication, but about deeper issues that went unaddressed. His mental health was in dire straits, yet the focus was always on his physical appearance, and the medications continued to pile up. What Elvis needed wasn't more pills. It was genuine care, real intervention, and support that went beyond the surface.
In the final years of his life, Elvis was no longer the vibrant man who had inspired millions. He had become a man trapped by his own body and mind, unable to break free from the cycle of physical and mental decline that had taken over his life. The pressures of fame, coupled with his growing dependence on medication and unhealthy habits, had stripped him of the very qualities that had made him the king of rock and roll. And yet, even in his darkest days, he held on to the fragments of the persona he had built, a king, even as he lost the battle within himself.
Elvis Presley was no stranger to prescription medication. Like many performers of his era, he relied on a variety of substances to keep up with the grueling demands of his career. In the beginning, it seemed harmless, just something to keep him awake on long tours, to ease the aches and pains that came with high-energy performances, or to help him sleep after the adrenaline rush of a show. But what started as a simple reliance on prescribed medication soon turned into something far more dangerous. By the late 1960s, Elvis's dependence on drugs was spiraling out of control. He took amphetamines to stay energized, barbiturates to sleep, opiates to numb the constant pain, and tranquilizers to calm his nerves. His medicine cabinet wasn't just full, it was overflowing. He carried multiple bottles of pills wherever he went, and his inner circle, known as the Memphis Mafia, often enabled his habits rather than challenging them. The men closest to him, the ones who were supposed to protect him, instead ensured that he always had access to whatever substances he wanted.
The effects of these drugs were devastating. Elvis became sluggish and incoherent at times, slurring his words during conversations and struggling to focus. His once sharp mind, the same one that had allowed him to memorize complex song lyrics and choreography, now seemed dulled. He suffered from extreme mood swings, going from euphoric highs to crushing lows in the span of hours. The pills robbed him of the charisma and quick wit that had once made him one of the most beloved entertainers in the world.
As his dependence worsened, so did his appearance. The side effects of the drugs, combined with his deteriorating health, led to rapid weight gain. His face became bloated, his eyes often bloodshot, and his movements sluggish. He no longer looked like the Elvis Presley the world had fallen in love with. Fans who attended his concerts in the mid-1970s were shocked to see the king of rock and roll stumbling on stage, sometimes forgetting lyrics or needing assistance just to get through a performance. At times, he would ramble incoherently, losing his train of thought as the drugs clouded his mind. But Elvis wasn't just losing himself on stage, he was also losing control of his life. His paranoia increased, and he started believing that people were plotting against him. He would wake up in the middle of the night convinced that someone was trying to break into Graceland. He often carried guns, even sleeping with them beside his bed, prepared for an enemy that didn't exist. His declining mental state, fueled by the toxic combination of medication and isolation, made him more erratic than ever.
Despite the warning signs, no one stopped him. His doctors continued to write prescriptions, feeding his addiction rather than treating it. One doctor in particular, Dr. George Nikopoulos, nicknamed Shianatish Dr. Nick, became infamous for the staggering amount of medication he provided Elvis. It was later revealed that in the final years of Elvis's life, Dr. Nick had prescribed him over 10,000 doses of sedatives, amphetamines, and narcotics, an almost incomprehensible number.
Each new prescription was another nail in the coffin, pushing Elvis further down on the path of self-destruction. He was trapped in a vicious cycle. He took uppers to stay awake, downers to sleep, and painkillers to numb the physical and emotional agony he couldn't escape.
But the worst was yet to come. Elvis Presley was a man in crisis. His body, once strong and agile, had become a ticking time bomb. Years of overindulgence, prescription drug use, and untreated medical conditions had left him in a state of irreversible decline. His liver was failing, his heart was struggling, and his digestive system had become a disaster zone. One of the most horrifying aspects of Elvis's health problems was his chronic constipation.
What many saw as a minor issue was, in reality, a severe medical condition that had plagued him for years. His intestines had become so enlarged from years of poor diet and medication abuse that they had stopped functioning properly. He would sometimes go weeks without a proper bowel movement, leaving him bloated and in excruciating pain. The constipation was so severe that his doctors eventually resorted to enemas and laxatives, but nothing seemed to provide lasting relief. Elvis's health problems didn't stop there. He was also battling high blood pressure, liver damage, glaucoma, and early signs of diabetes. His immune system was failing and he was constantly fatigued, unable to muster the energy to do even the most basic activities. Despite all of this, he continued to perform. He had become a prisoner of his own legend, forced to keep up appearances even as his body betrayed him. His final performances were a shadow of what they once were. Elvis, bloated and drenched in sweat, struggling to make it through songs that had once come effortlessly. By 1977, those closest to him knew the truth. Elvis wasn't just sick, he was dying.
And then on the morning of August 16, 1977, the unthinkable happened.
Elvis Presley was found unresponsive on the floor of his Graceland bathroom. He had been attempting to use the toilet when his body finally gave out. The cause? A massive heart attack triggered by years of prescription drug abuse, untreated health issues, and the immense strain of constipation.
But the most shocking part? When doctors performed the autopsy, they discovered something horrifying. Elvis's colon was twice the normal size and packed with over 4 months' worth of waste. His body had been slowly poisoning itself from the inside, and in the end, it couldn't take it anymore.
Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, the man who had electrified audiences around the world, had died in one of the most tragic and undignified ways imaginable. Alone, collapsed on his bathroom floor, the victim of years of silent suffering.
The day Elvis Presley died was, in a tragic sense, a culmination of everything that had been slowly killing him. His death was not the dignified end of a cultural icon, nor was it the peaceful passing of a man who had given everything to his art. Instead, it was shocking, undignified, and deeply unsettling. Elvis was found unresponsive on the bathroom floor of Graceland, his body slumped next to the toilet. The scene was gruesome, and the discovery of his body in such a way sent shockwaves throughout the world. The toilet death theory, as it would later be called, has remained one of the most talked about aspects of Elvis's death. Some would argue that his final moments were the result of years of neglect, poor health, and over-medication. But the theory that has gained particular attention is that Elvis's death may have been triggered by the immense strain caused by his chronic constipation. For months, Elvis had suffered from severe gastrointestinal distress. His body was overwhelmed by toxins, and his intestines, unable to function properly due to years of neglect, became severely impacted. The theory suggests that Elvis had been straining on the toilet when the pressure on his heart became too much. This physical strain, combined with the unhealthy buildup of waste in his body, may have contributed to the heart attack that took his life. His death, in this sense, was not just a result of his dependency on drugs or his physical ailments. It was the tragic outcome of a body that had been abused and neglected for far too long. Despite the theory gaining traction over the years, medical experts disagree on whether the constipation was the direct cause of Elvis's death. What is certain, however, is that his health had been in severe decline for years before that fateful morning. His organs were failing, his mind was fraying, and his body was beyond repair. It was a shocking end to a life that had once been full of promise, talent, and the kind of energy that had shaped an entire generation.
The story of Elvis's death is incomplete without understanding the role of the medical professionals who treated him during his final years. For a man who was as famous as Elvis Presley, it might seem hard to believe that his healthcare would be anything less than top tier. But in truth, the medical care he received was a grave failure, one that ultimately contributed to his premature death.
Dr. George Nikopoulos, known as Dr. Nick, was Elvis's primary physician in the final years of his life. A man who had once been trusted with the care of one of the most famous men in the world, Dr. Nick became notorious for his role in enabling Elvis's drug addiction. While it's difficult to point to one single person as the cause of Elvis's decline, Dr. Nick's excessive prescribing of medication was undoubtedly a major factor in Elvis's downfall. In the years leading up to his death, Dr. Nick prescribed Elvis thousands of pills, painkillers, sedatives, stimulants, and tranquilizers. At times, Elvis was prescribed an astronomical number of pills, more than 10,000 over a short period of time. His medical record was a series of prescriptions that did little to address the root causes of his problems and only exacerbated the issues. Rather than seeking to help Elvis with his addiction or recommend appropriate mental and physical treatment, Dr. Nick continued to prescribe a cocktail of drugs that left Elvis in an increasingly compromised state.
Dr. Nick's actions did not go unnoticed. After Elvis's death, the public and the authorities began to question his role in the singer's demise. The doctor was later brought to trial for overprescribing medications, though he was ultimately acquitted of any wrongdoing. The legal aftermath left many wondering how Elvis had been allowed to spiral so far without anyone intervening. How could a man who had changed the world through his music have been so utterly failed by the very people who were supposed to care for him? Elvis's death wasn't just a result of his own choices, it was also a consequence of a medical system that had failed to intervene, a culture that allowed celebrity to override genuine concern for health, and doctors who failed to provide the care Elvis so desperately needed. Following Elvis Presley's death, the autopsy report was shrouded in secrecy. While the official cause of death was listed as a heart attack, the full details of the autopsy would not be made public for decades. The family had requested that the autopsy be sealed, and for many years rumors and speculations swirled around what had truly caused the king's death. Was it the years of drug abuse? Was it the constant pain he had suffered in silence? Was there something darker hiding behind the official report? When the autopsy finally came to light, the results were as shocking as they were heartbreaking. It was revealed that Elvis's internal organs had suffered severe damage. His liver was in an advanced state of deterioration, showing signs of chronic disease. His heart, overworked and weakened by years of strain, was also found to be in terrible condition. In addition to this, extensive damage to his colon was discovered, confirming that the chronic constipation he had suffered from for years had caused irreversible harm to his digestive system. The revelation of these findings left the public stunned, not just because of the extensive damage to Elvis's body, but because it became clear that many of these health issues had been overlooked or ignored for years. His physical decline had not been sudden. It had been slow and insidious, a consequence of poor lifestyle choices, misdiagnoses, and a failure of medical professionals to address his underlying health problems.
Elvis's relationship with drugs was complicated. What began as a medical necessity turned into an all-consuming addiction. His doctors initially prescribed medication to treat legitimate health concerns, but over time, the drugs became a crutch, a way to mask the physical and emotional pain he could no longer manage. The medical community's failure to recognize the severity of his addiction led to a vicious cycle of misdiagnosis and over-medication. As Elvis's final years unfolded, he continued to perform despite his declining health. Fans saw glimpses of the king they once knew, but the reality of his struggle was evident in every show. His performances, though still popular, were marred by his fatigue and physical deterioration. Even as he struggled, the world would remember him as the king of rock and roll, an icon who, in the end, became a tragic symbol of excess, addiction, and a life lost. As we reflect on the tragic journey of Elvis Presley, we are reminded that even the brightest stars can burn out in the most heartbreaking ways. His story is one of incredible talent, but also of vulnerability and the consequences of neglect. If this story moved you or left you with questions, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more deep dives into the untold stories of the legends we thought we knew. Stay tuned, and thank you for watching.